Good morning, everyone. Welcome to NorthStar Community online and in-person service. So glad to have see everybody here and to have all you join me online. So we always talk about such wonderful, pleasant subjects, and we're talking about regrets. And I've been reading Daniel Pink's book on regret, and first saw it. I love the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal, and I don't read the front pages. I don't read the second. I don't read the business pages. I read the reviews and off duty. Love both of those. And so they always have books in there, and they had a great summary on the book about regret by Daniel Pink. And so obviously I read it and thought it was pretty cool, and so we're going to be looking at that. Now for us in the 12-step program, which I assume many of you are if you're joining us, think of this as step 4, but we're looking at it with a little bit different language, but very much the same thing. So in October of 1960, Charles Dumont, a French composer and a friend lyrist, showed up at Edith Piaf's apartment. She was a famous French singer. And they kept telling her that, and she was at best, she was a difficult person to get along with. I kind of pictured her being kind of the Madonna of her generation. He described her as mercurial and difficult, which I think are kind of the same thing. But she was difficult, that classic prima donna artist. And so they kept telling her they had this song they wanted her to hear, and of course she kept ignoring them, putting them off. She didn't really even regard them as first-rate musicians. She kind of saw them as second class. But anyway, somehow they persisted, and so they showed up at her apartment in October 1960, and they played this song for her. And the words, and trust me, you don't have to worry about me singing, so you are all safe, because you would not want that. No, nothing at all. No, I regret nothing at all. It's paid, swept away, forgotten. I couldn't care less about the past. So those were the words to the song. She had him play it over and over that day. She called in people from everywhere to come in that night to hear her, and she just couldn't get enough of it. And then there was a concert later that she sang at to raise money to preserve a theater there. She sang the song. She had 22 curtain calls for her to sing it again. It sold over 1 million copies. And so, sounds great, but Edith Piaf ended up dying 4 years later from liver damage due to alcohol and morphine addiction. So the point of the story is she may have been famous for this song. She may have sang it over and over and over. But I have a feeling she had some regrets in her life. But she wanted us to believe she didn't. So what we're after here is for us to understand regret a little more deeply so that maybe we can figure out ways to achieve that rich, full, meaningful life that we so much want. So, you think about how many people say, I have no regrets. They get the tattoos. I've seen guys with no regrets around their neck, which anybody puts a tattoo around their neck is probably having problems. So any of you out there that have neck tattoos, let's be honest, you did that when you were acting out, and you probably don't remember the evening that you did it on. But the fact is, we have all the time. I see, everywhere's no regrets. I have no regrets. And, I to a point, I understand that, but the fact is we have regret. There's things we have regret about. Maybe we were mean to someone. Maybe we didn't take a risk that we wished we would have. Maybe if we would have just done something different, maybe we would have hurt somebody. If we only left a little bit later. All those things, if they are. So, so at NorthStar, what we do is we look at addiction from a broad point of view. Is there substance addictions, there's compulsive behavior addictions, and that again would include shopping, eating, pornography, gambling, all those kind of things. You just can't stop, and it's destroying your life, and you're doing it to avoid pain in your life. And then, of course, the other one is that we become addicted to people, and that's probably the biggest one of all, really, if you think about it. And just to make this even more wonderful to hear, most of us have more than one of those. right? Most people who are addicted aren't satisfied with just one. We're going to make sure we have 2 or 3 of those. So they all fit together. And it's like a good friend Beth one time said, addiction is addiction, recovery is recovery. And it's so true. And once we see that, then we can start moving our lives forward. And so we've talked about this for the last few weeks at NorthStar, and I really do believe this, and it's certainly how I see recovery, is that so much of recovery really isn't about recovering from substances. It's not recovering from compulsive behaviors. It's not from recovering from the crazy, nutty relationships we get into. But the real recovery is about toxic shame, about how much shame we carry with ourselves. One of my favorite things, and I did it today, I just love doing this, and people even know I'm doing it and they still can't pass the test, is I heard this one time from one of my professors. They said, if you tell someone they're not so bad or they're good people who don't believe that, they can't look you in the eye. So today I couldn't help myself. I had a couple people in my room. I said, you're not so bad. And they both were like intently staring at me because they knew what I was doing, and they still looked away. We just do not think we're okay. That's why we're in addiction. That's why you're online with me. That's why you're sitting here. We just cannot get past the shame of our life. We can't get past the things we think about ourselves. And again, what's so unfortunate about this is that for many of us, the shame we carry, we were victims in a lot of this. I mean, we really were. There's nothing we could do different about the dysfunctional families we grew up in, or the traumatic things that hit us, the things that we experienced. And that's why I keep trying to put logic to our shame so we can do something about it. When we're overwhelmed with shame, with toxic shame, which again, so make sure you understand the difference. Shame is a necessary and unwanted feeling, but you need it. If I do something I should feel bad about, I need to feel shame. Because if I feel shame, I may not do it again, right? But toxic shame is, I am a bad person. I inherently am a mistake. I am inherently someone who will never, ever get it right. I don't deserve it. I do terrible, blah, blah, blah. That's why toxic shame is so vicious for us. And so that's why we're looking at regret. So we can kind of see how us walking around in denial, saying we have no regrets, means that we're trying to shove those things down. And then if we can, the great saying is, it's so much better to talk about our emotions than to act out our emotions. And I think this is an example here. Because I tell people all the time, if you come to, people will say to me individually, well, my life's really messed up, and I just don't know if, a group like NorthStar would help me. And I go, well, first of all, your story is not even nearly one of the worst stories in there as far as the pain and stuff. And so that's what you come for, so you can start hearing you're not alone, that there are other people out there. And when we hide, we just destroy ourselves. So this was a quote on Twitter. This is one of my new favorite quotes now. My body is not a temple, it's a storage unit for my regrets. That is such a great quote. And I think a lot of us can really relate to that. And that's why addiction is so attractive to us. Remember, if you see addiction as habitual behavior to avoid pain, this makes lots of sense. So I was trying to figure out scripture here that I could find that really hit me. And I really wasn't finding much I really liked. And then I thought, well, what about Habakkuk? Now, it isn't quite the same, but I think if we can see it from a regret point of view, it may make sense. This is one of my favorite. It tells you, how positive I can be, right? This is one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible is Habakkuk 1, 1 through 4. So this is Habakkuk talking to God, and let's just say he's like going, what are you doing here, God? That's basically what he's doing, right? I love Habakkuk. For you guys that have been around me, this is one of my favorite books. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you make me look at Fox and CNN? No, that's not what it says there, right? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. So Habakkuk definitely is frustrated with God, and he's going, what are you doing? And of course, if you know the story about Habakkuk, what God tells him is, I'm going to take the worst people on the planet, and I'm going to use them to punish Israel, my chosen people. That's basically the story. And Habakkuk's going, do you really think you want to do that? There could be some other ways to do this. And like I said, I always love the part about Habakkuk when he tries to work God a little bit and reminds him of all the great things he's done. You remember that miracle you did and fixed everything in 30 minutes? Do you remember that? Do you remember when you did that over there? You were awesome. And God goes, no, this is going to be painful. And unfortunately for us as humans, we need pain to get better. And we don't need immediate pain. We need sometimes long-suffering pain. I wish it wasn't like that, but it really is. I've never seen anybody recover without it. So if we take Habakkuk's opening line here and kind of turn it and look at it from our own lives, where we go, why do we keep doing this? Why can't I stop? Why do I despise myself so much? Why did I do that again? Why am I so awful? Why do I keep doing things? Then I think we can relate to this a little bit. And at the end of the day, I wish I could tell you Habakkuk is a Hollywood movie where it all ends well. It doesn't. It's very awful, actually. Basically talking about 500 years of judgment for the Israelites. I don't know about you, but that's not a happy ending. It is a happy ending 500 years later, but it's not in the short term. And it's really bad. But at the end, Habakkuk says, you know what? At the end of the day, yeah, it's going to be awful, but God, you love us. And then we think about Peter when he betrayed Jesus. Jesus says, I'm going to die. Peter says, I will never abandon you. You count on Peter. I'll be there for you. And Jesus goes, no, you won't. So then Peter, of course, denies him 3 times. The rooster crows. And, Peter feels terrible. But later, Jesus reinstates him. So that's what we have to, that's the hope in recovery, I hope we can hear is, yeah, Israel took a long time to get better, but they did. They recovered. We don't have 500 years to do that, so we need to move on it a little faster. But what we do is we run around acting like we either go it's the problem with toxic shame is on one end of the thing, we live recklessly and without limits, and we do whatever we want. We drink as much as we want. We hurt people as much as we want. We hurt ourselves as much. We just go on and on and on with no limits. Or we live on the other end where we don't do anything. We sit in our house and despise ourselves and everything in between. And none of that works. We need limits. We need shame. We need these things. We need regret. Regret makes us better. That's the point here. So Daniel Pink's quote is, regret is not dangerous or abnormal. It's a deviation from a steady path to happiness. It is healthy and universal, and it's an integral part of our being alive. So, when we look at regret sometimes, one of the regrets we all understand is the one where if I only would have, right? How many of those times we think that? Or I remember I used to joke when I was a kid, when IBM was tearing up the world, I used to go, why didn't my dad invest in IBM? Well, why didn't I invest in Google, right? We just don't know. So we have those kind of regrets, but those aren't so bad. The other regrets are the things where we harm people because we're so hurt. We're so, when you're walking around with PTSD and CPTSD and your ACE score is an 8, you're going to hurt yourself and others around you at times. And so then you can say, I have no regrets. I don't look back. I just move forward. And I'm going, no, you don't. And if you can look at those regrets and do something about them, then you can move on. That's what rich, meaningful life is being honest with yourself and others. So, and the other thing that Dr. Pink talks about is regret is better understood as a process rather than a one-time concept. So our recovery from is always about process. Always kid about, and wish God would put a little button on us or a light switch somewhere. We could turn off all this stuff and turn it right back on. But that's not how we're built nor how it works. So regret makes us human. regret makes us better. So what can we do to help us understand regret a little better and make it not quite so tough? Because let's be honest, I don't know about anyone in this that's listening to me, but I don't know about you, but I don't like thinking about my regrets. It's not fun. It's not something I enjoy. But they're there. So here's what we do. We're geniuses at doing two things. We have the ability to visit the past and the future at the same time, which means we're really good at telling stories that never really happened. So we're both seasoned time travelers and we're skilled fabulists. We can do it all at once, right? So what happens is we put those two together, being a seasoned time traveler and a skilled storyteller, and put them together, and it really gives regret power. And if we can understand this, it will help us to stop doing it. So, again, we were talking about this Friday night, which people were arguing with me, and I told them afterwards I appreciated them validating my point, which means that I was right. I'm kidding. So we talked about people, and it's a tough subject, but we talked about people who have been sexually abused. It's a great example of regret. So a lot of people I know who have been sexually abused carry a lot of shame with them. They feel terrible about themselves. They beat themselves up. It's oftentimes so bad that I call it, you get your foundation ripped out from under you, and you don't even know who you are in many ways. So how does this have to do with being a seasoned time traveler and a great storyteller? So the debate we had at first on Friday night is important, is that I don't hear people necessarily blaming themselves. So if I'm 7 years old and I was sexually abused, I'm not blaming myself for it, but here's where I get in trouble. I blame myself for not stopping it. I blame myself for not standing up to it. So we get that it's wrong, bad, shouldn't have happened. Or worse is I hear people will talk about how they, as children, didn't stand up for a loved one who was being abused. So you hear the time traveling and the fable going here. So what we do is we go back in time. Let's say I'm in my 60s. I go back in time and I impose my 60-year-oldness on my 6-year-oldness. Does that make sense? And we forget what it's like to be a 6-year-old. We can try, but we can't. Everybody around us are giants physically. We've been taught to respect and love everybody, right? And respect your adults, respect your seniors. Weren't we all taught that? So we have a senior who's being abusive and being awful, but we're told to make sure that we respect them. Worse, family members deny it. We could sit there. I've known story after story of pedophiles that have lived in a household, and the spouse knew it was going on and went into denial mode. So at 6 years old, what are you going to do with that? You going to get up and confront them and beat them up? I mean, you see how we change history? And what does it do? It makes us feel bad, worse about us. So I hope this makes sense what we do here. We change the context. We change so much of what the reality was at that time. And then we move forward into the future and blame ourselves for it and beat ourselves up even more for it. That's where regret gets its power. So and make sure we understand there's differences here. So, like if I love a sports team and they continue to lose, that disappoints me. But I ain't doing that, right? So I'm not having regret. Regret is when I sense that I have some control in this, that I have, the power with this regret. That's why I have the regret, because I could have changed things. And there's certainly, we could look at some regrets we've done that certainly that's true. But for us, I think for many of us in addiction recovery, ours is very deep, dysfunctional, families we grew up in is what creates so much of this, and our ability to change the story, forget about the realities, is what gets us in so much trouble. And so we compare ourselves. It's another thing we do. We may, like I think about, sometimes I'll hear people say, well, I stood up to them and I told them to stop. Well, if I'm someone who was sexually abused and I hear that story, I immediately compare myself, well, there I go. I was weak and wimpy, and must have been just even worse than I thought I was. So we're giving regret a lot of power that it doesn't need. But at the same time, we're going to have regret. So they did this survey, and 82, so first of all, everybody says, I have no regrets. How many times you heard that? How many times you said it, right? Well, okay. So they did a survey. 82% of people reported having regret at least occasionally. At least occasionally. 23% said always have regret, live with regret, and 25% said often live with regret. That's much more real. They did this thing where they observed college students in conversations, and it was a very large sample. I think it was 4,500 people. And the number one emotion talked about was love. Guess what number two was? You guessed it, regret. That was the number two subject in people's conversations, was regret. And there's two ways we look at regret. There's one is at least and if only, right? So at least tends to be a little more positive than if only, right? Well, at least I did something to try to stop it is better than if only I had not gone there in the first place. You see the difference? So we have a little more control in at least as opposed to if only. So toxic shame fills us with this if only this, if only that. Again, so we're time travelers, and then we changed the story and we became great fable tellers. And what's toxic shame tell us? You're inherently flawed. There's something inherently wrong with you. You deserve nothing but mediocrity at best. You're never enough. And while you're at it, make sure you beat yourself up a lot. That's what toxic shame does. That's the message that it gives us. So if we can understand regret and understand the stories we're telling about our regret and really step back and look at them and figure out if maybe we're not actually accurate with that. And again, I get in debates all the time with people say, well, when I was a middle schooler, I go, you don't remember what that was like. You don't have a clue. You don't remember what it was like growing into your new physical body, your voice changing. You don't remember what it was like, all that craziness that was, accompanied being at middle school. You don't remember. You may remember some stories, even those probably aren't real. They're real, but they're not the way you remember it. But if we can step back, because think about it, with our shame levels high, we're going to not tell good stories on ourselves, I can promise you, right? In fact, and Dr. Pink talks about this, he goes, 2 decades of research on counterfactual thinking exposes an oddity.